evening, everybody. If you would like, you can get your Bibles opened up to Joshua chapter 10. Joshua chapter 10. We're looking at the conquest of the land and God fulfilling those promises that He made concerning giving the land to them. Now, how did they feel about those promises? I mean, we can go all the way back to Abraham. Did Abraham trust those promises?
Yes.
All right. Did Joseph trust those promises? Yes. Did Moses trust those promises?
Yes.
Did the people that Moses led out of Egypt trust those promises? Up to a point. Sometimes they seem pretty good about it. Other times, definitely not. And so now we're seeing God fulfilling those promises with that second generation that had more faith than their parents at Kadesh Barnea. Let's do a little review here of what's taking place. So you remember they cross over, they come into the land. What's the first city that in the land proper? They've already conquered some on the Transjordan side, but what's the first city in the land? Jericho. All right, and then what's the second city? Ai, or Ai. And then they come up and they're in this. They go up to Shechem, and then they get a message from the men at Gibeon. They're camped at Gilgal, and they get a message from the people at Gideon. And what do the people at Gideon want to do? Make peace, but they don't know that they're from Gideon. They think that they're from a long way away. So they end up making peace with them. And then we have some kings that are going to take issue with Gibeon not joining their alliance. The king of Jerusalem, or Jabesh, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And what do they decide to do since Gideon didn't join their alliance? Yep, we're going to attack Gideon, which sounds terrible for the poor Gideonites, because after all, we're kind of sympathetic towards the Gideonites because they had faith, right? They had faith that God was actually going to take this land, and so they said, we would be wise to join Israel rather than fight against Israel. And so that seems to be what they're doing. But then these five kings are ganging up against them to come and fight them, and so what do?
Gideon says, hey, Israel, remember that covenant we made with you?
That's right, Joshua, come and save us. And so what's really interesting about this is up to this point, it seems that the plan is going to be take Jericho, take Ai, take the next city. But what happens here is God gathers 5 major powerhouse cities in the southern region to all come together to deliver into Joshua's hands. So Joshua and the army marches all night, catches them by surprise in the morning, and defeats them, and they begin to flee. And they flee from Gibeon over to Beth Horon, and they are being struck down there. They continue to flee, and there's a couple of really interesting things that happen here. The first is, you remember what the two things are that I'm thinking of? The sun, Joshua prays that the Lord would extend the day by causing the sun to stand still, and the Lord does. I mentioned, I think, last class, amazing miracle. Because we've got the parting of the Red Sea. Everybody knows that story. And it is awesome to envision God heaping up walls of water on your right hand and on your left. But to cause the sun to stand still for an entire day, in other words, doubling the length of the day. Why did Joshua request this?
Need more time of daylight to fight.
We've got our enemies on the run. God, give us more time to wipe these out. So God does. And then what is the second thing that happens here? Hailstorm. And God struck down more with the hail than Joshua was striking down with the sword. And so those promises, going back to Abraham, that Joseph believed in, that Moses believed in, that the children of Israel at Kadesh Barnea didn't believe in, God's fulfilling those in an awesome and powerful way, displaying what He's capable of doing. And so here He's gathered the forces from the southern area together and defeated them miraculously, defeated them with his army, and they continue. This day lasts a long time. And we mentioned before, I can't help but believe that God was almost giving them superhuman strength as well. Because remember, they marched all night, then they're chasing their enemies all that day, which ends up being a doubly long day. And they continue to chase them through some pretty rugged terrain, all the way down. They come all the way down to Makkedah. And at Makkedah, those 5 kings that had gathered together, what did the 5 kings do in Makkedah? They hide. They hide. Their armies have been dispersed at this point, so they hide in the cave. That brings us to verse 16, where we pick up the new material today. Anybody have anything that you want to mention before we get into the new material?
One thing, even though it says in the Bible that God caused the sun to stand still at daylight, lasting longer than normal. From what we know from sending satellites and all that, actually the Earth stood still because the Earth rotates around the sun. So at that period of time, God stopped Earth for that continuing time for that to actually happen. But at that time, it was just easier to say the sun stood still. But that's what we know now.
Right. That's what they saw. That's what they saw was the
Right.
sun standing still.
Right.
Very good. Anything else? Somebody else going to say something?
I'll say this: what we're going to see tonight in tonight's lesson, if this wasn't enough, we're going to get to see even greater power, I think, in tonight's lesson because of the size of the armies that they have to fight.
That's a good point. All right. So news comes to Joshua saying, "Hey, we believe the kings are hiding themselves in a cave at Makkedah." What does Joshua say at this point? What does he command? Yeah, all right. If we've got them hemmed up in there, here's what I want you to do. Verse 18, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them. Do not stay yourselves here, but pursue your enemy and attack the rear ranks. Do not allow them to enter into the cities, for the Lord your God has delivered them into your hand. I would say what you see with Joshua right now is an example of this saying, strike while the iron is hot. God has given us an opportunity. When the opportunity is there, what do you need to do? Seize it. Don't dilly-dally. Get after it. How did Paul view opportunities when there was a great door of opportunity open to him in a particular city to preach the gospel? Yeah. And seize it. If God gives you an opportunity on something, don't dilly-dally around. Get busy doing it. And I think you see Joshua doing that here. So we have opportunity. We pray for God's help to be able to utilize this opportunity. He's given us an extended daylight period. Don't do anything except close up the cave, post some guards. You continue to pursue your enemy. And so the people did. And it happened while Joshua and the children of Israel made an end of slaying, all with a very great slaughter, till they had finished, that those who escaped entered into the fortified cities. So some did escape and went into the fortified cities. And sieges will be laid against some of these cities, as we'll see later on. But right now, all that they could kill, they did. And so they were able to defeat the main part of the army. Some escaped into these cities. The kings are back at the cave of Makkedah.
And 2, this was all part of God's plan for some of the people to stay in those cities as well. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe back in the book of Deuteronomy, there was somewhere where God actually said to do this because the wild animals would take those cities over.
Yeah.
So that was part of his plan, not all the people to die at one time.
Right. So what's happened at this point is the military threat against Israel has been eliminated, at least in the southern region. But there are still people occupying the different cities, which, as Colby was saying, actually works out pretty well for them. Because if there's nobody there and you can't be there either, what's going to happen to the place? Yeah, it's going to be overrun. it's much more advantageous to the children of Israel for somebody to be there tending the vineyards and tending the orchards and so forth until they're ready to move in. And so, so this is working out the way that God planned and said that it would. Any other thoughts through verse 21? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's yeah. Notice this last expression in verse 21. No one moved his tongue against any of the children of Israel. What do you think that means?
They were scared.
They were scared. Yeah. There's no threat against the children of Israel. Not even a verbal threat against them. Nobody can say anything or do anything against the children of Israel because God is helping them marvelously. So they come back to the cave after our time frame now. How do you think everybody's feeling at this point? I would expect them to be exhausted because they have had no sleep the night before, marched all night, fought all day, double time, because God had extended the day a whole nother day. And now they've pursued everybody until they can't pursue them anymore. They come back to the cave, and it doesn't appear the day's over yet, because when they get back to the cave, what do? Yep. And they bring out these 5 kings. And so they bring out these 5 kings, and Joshua called for the men of Israel, and the captains of the men of war went with him, and he said, "Come near. Put your feet on the necks of these kings." And they do. What's going on? As you read that, what were you thinking? Why is this happening? And what's the significance of it?
It's that they don't have the power. Israel actually puts their feet on their neck on the ground. That's right before you end up killing them or whatever, but it shows anybody that's watching that they're defeated, and the kings know that they're defeated.
Yeah, that's right. So why do you think this is important to Israel? Yes. Consider what's just happened. If the events of the day have been lost on you up to this point, what Joshua does is he calls us, here were these kings that said, remember we talked about Psalm 2, the nations rage. They ally themselves together against God and against his plan. That's kind of what you see with these 5 kings. How's that working out? God laughs. And he brings them to ruin. And so, in case that point was lost, Joshua says, hey guys, come here. Do you see these kings who rose up and allied themselves together to defeat what our Lord is trying to do? Put your foot on them. You see the victory that God has given you. That's the symbolism. That's to lock into their mind. That's right. God has given us this victory. We are conquering because of the Lord. And so Joshua said to them, do not be afraid, nor be dismayed. Be strong and of good courage, for thus the Lord will do to all of your enemies against who you fight. And afterward Joshua struck them and killed them and hanged them on 5 trees. And they were hanging on trees till evening. So remember I said the day wasn't over yet. I had time to do this, hang them on trees, and it still wasn't evening yet. They're going to remain there till evening. And when it came time for going down of the sun, when the sun begins to move again and set, Joshua commands them to be taken back. Why? That was the law. And he's careful to observe the law here. God's giving the victory, and he shows the victory in the putting the captain's feet on their necks and then also executing them and hanging them on trees. But he keeps the law of God. The law of God said you're not to leave a body overnight. And so he takes it down, he puts the bodies of the kings in the caves, and then what do? Yeah, keep that up, and it remains there to this very day. So when the author of this book was writing this and making a note on that, You can still go there today and see that. Now, we don't know, I don't think, where Makeda is today. At least I'm not familiar with anything that anybody's said for certain they know where it's at. But at this time, they knew where it's at. You can still go there and see that heap of rocks there. Still a reminder of the victory that God gave them on this doubly long day. Thoughts, comments, questions through verse 27.
Going back to 14, I like that the Bible says, the Lord listens to the voice of man. So, Joshua prayed to God, God answers his prayers. That should be a faithful for us and watching for us.
Yeah, very good. All right, we said the day wasn't over yet. So verse 28, on that day, Joshua took Makeda, the city of Makeda, struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them and all the people who were in it. He let none remain. He also did to the king of Makeda as he'd done to the king of Jericho, I don't know why I said Joshua, because it's the next verse. Then Joshua passed from Makeda and all of Israel with him to Libnah. All right, and they fought against Libnah. So here's Makeda down here. And it appears this is still on the same day. And then to Libnah, we don't know exactly where Libnah is, but somewhere in this same area in the region of the south. And they fought against Libnah, and what does the Lord do to Libnah? Delivers it into, and they struck all the people with the edge of the sword, let none remain. They did to the king of Libnah as they'd done to the king of Jericho. And Joshua passed on to Libnah, and all of the men of Israel with him, where? To Lachish. And we have Lachish over here, not too far from Makeda. And what happens at Lachish? Yes. Okay, so you remember when we talked about Jericho, when and again, I don't know if these cities were heavily fortified, if these were walled cities. I don't know a lot about that. The text doesn't say. But when we talked about Jericho, when a city was taken, how was it usually taken? It was burned, all right? Sieged. Was that a one-day thing usually? Not usually. Jericho was unusual because it was only lasted a week, right? The siege only lasted a week, and then the walls fell down. And so that was unusual. But these places, Makeda, Libnah, and Lachish, at least Makeda and Libnah, fell within one day. Because if you notice that they camped against Lachish, and then what does it say in verse 32? The Lord delivered Lachish into the hand of Israel, who took it on the second day. I take it that the first day was the day that the sun stood still. The second day is the next day. They took basically two cities in that first day and defeated this coalition of 5 kings, their armies out in the field, and then took 2 cities and encamped against another and ended up taking it on the next day. And they don't seem to be overly exhausted at this point either, because they're going to continue this campaign before they go back to get it. Any thoughts up to this point?
Well, it just shows how many people that God destroyed just with the hail, when it says that he killed more with the hail than what they killed with the sword. So when you got God behind you, no matter what the numbers are against you, I mean, you could have as small as 300 wipe out all of them.
I'm not sure. In this day in combat, especially when you were on offense, would you typically fight on multiple, consecutive days like this? It would be exhausting.
It would be very exhausting. Yes, very exhausting.
There has to be some endurance here.
Yeah, that's one thing that I know that I have noticed the time references before. But I guess this time I've been more impressed with it than I have been in the past. Just to think about their march from Gibeon, from Gilgal to Gibeon, and then their pursuit from Gibeon to Beth Horon and other places, and then the double long day, and then all the way their travel over there. I would suspect if we had to hike this at a leisurely pace, it would take us several days just to hike this. They were in full pursuit mode while doing this, taking cities and encountering enemies, and still going strong.
Also, if you look at the war tactics, even during the Roman Empire, Persian, and on further back, when they were attacking in large numbers, everybody didn't actually start doing battle. They were like in waves set up, or this wave would go through and the next. Then they'd have archers between to actually help as it's going on, instead of just everybody running over one another fighting. They kind of done it in a strategic way that has actually been used for centuries when you actually study the history of warfare. Plus, they had God on their side, so, I mean, strength wasn't the issue, numbers wasn't the issue.
Right, that's right. Ken?
And that's what we could always make is that maybe God did it this way, 24-hour day, it was exactly 24 hours going and defeating them all the next day after he put out the march and everything, that they would realize that it was God himself doing it, that he would be glorified and not they themselves.
I think that's right. I think the way this account is laid out, Colby and I were talking before class, it seems that the conquest of the land took approximately 6 years to what we normally think of as conquering the land. What we're given here is a glimpse into a 2-day period. And we look at the devastation that took place on these 2 days and say, that's what God's able to do. And it seems like this is highlighted to glorify God's power and his purposes in this, his work in this. What were you going to say, Cole?
I was just going to, of course, all the glory does go to God, but I'm just so impressed with the zeal and the faith that Joshua has, because going back to what Gerald mentioned, it would have been real easy for him to have said, we're tired, let's take a break and then we'll move on. But he kept going.
That's right.
And we can learn a lot of lessons, I think, from him in our spiritual walk.
All right, so the second day, Lachish falls, and then you also notice that Horam, king of Gezer, in verse 33, Gezer is going to be up here. He comes down to help at Lachish, and so he gets caught up in that as well. And so Joshua struck him and his people until there were none left remaining. From Lachish, Joshua passed on to Eglon, and somewhere in the south, most scholars think. And they encamped against it and fought against it, and they took it when? On that day, yeah, on that second day. So here's another city that falls that next day, and utterly destroyed all the people that were in it, according to what he'd done in Lachish. And then Joshua went up from Eglon, and all of Israel with him, to Hebron, and fought against Hebron, and took it and struck it with the sword, its king, all of its cities. Now notice, Hebron's a pretty major place because it's listed even with its surrounding cities that are there. And they did to it as they had done to the other kings. And then Joshua returned, and all of Israel with him, to Derbe, or Debir, and we don't know where Debir is, it's in the south here, and fought against it, and took it as well. So you've got Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, Debir, all fall in a 2-day period of time, or maybe a 3-day period of time. I don't know that we have a time reference on Debir there. And so he takes it, struck it with the edge of the sword, destroyed all the people, left none remaining, as he'd done to the others. And so that is the southern campaign. The southern campaign seems to have taken place in just a few days. How is that possible? How is it possible to go in and take over a whole southern part of a territory, a region of multiple kingdoms and cities? That's what God's able to do. That's exactly right. And so that's the conclusion. So when we talk about the central campaign, we're impressed with God's power to level the city of Jericho and then not lose a And then we also see that if God's not with them, a little village like Ai is able to handle the Israelites. But when God is with them, Ai stands no chance. And as a matter of fact, not even a coalition of stronger kings stand any chance. We see that in the southern campaign. And God can bring down all of these in a matter of just a couple of few days.
Can't you imagine from all these events, what has been broadcast across the world, when the news comes, hey, remember Israel had come out of Egypt? They destroyed almost half the country in a couple of days.
Yeah. So,
somewhere else.
yeah, what is going on with that? What? Yeah, what is going on with it? Why is this happening? Yeah. That is interesting. Colby, would you read 40 through 43?
So Joshua conquered all the land, the mountain country, and the south, and the lowland, and the wilderness slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. And Joshua conquered them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, even as far as Gibeon. All these kings and their land Joshua took at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal.
All right, so you remember Gilgal's where they started from. That's where the men of Gibeon came and said, hey, we need help. Come and help us. And Joshua and the army headed out, marched all night, and they conquer all of this area that we've talked about at one time because God helped them, and then now they return back to the camp. So it seems to be a very compressed period of time that all of this takes place. So if we were looking at the map, you remember that before they actually entered into the land of Canaan proper, on the Transjordan side, that they conquered Sihon and Og's territory there. And then they move into what we call the central campaign, and really you just have two places that, or maybe three places. We think of Jericho, we think of Ai, and then we think that they went up to Shechem, so they didn't have any opposition. They were able to travel all the way up to Shechem to renew the covenant up there. So they have control of this area. Now what we see in the southern campaign is we see them now control all of this territory. And if you look at it, they gained all of this territory in a couple of days. I don't know exactly how long it took them to take the Transjordanic side, and I don't know the time reference on how much was taken in the central campaign, but just a few days to take the whole southern area. And so at this point, if you're an Israelite soldier or a Canaanite soldier, you have to be thinking, wow, Yahweh is powerful. Yahweh is powerful. Any other thoughts through chapter 10? Yes. Yes. If this spirit could have been kept through the days of the judges, well, we wouldn't have the days of the judges. We would have a very different atmosphere. We wouldn't be reading about the things that we read about in the days of the judges. The problem is this spirit of let's be diligent to follow what God says and carry out his instruction on this only lasted so long. And then they lost their zeal and their fervor. And that's when the problem started. Good point. Anything else?
History, we may be looking at that, but what you just described, it takes courageous men to carry out work like this. But at the same time, prosperity and peace happens. This cycle runs throughout all of history. Man does not become kind of lazy, complacent.
Absolutely.
And just kind of let things go, and that's when it all falls.
Yep.
And I mean, certainly, he becomes more trustworthy himself. God.
Yeah. And Deuteronomy. Now, when you go into the land and you inherit cities that you did not build, and you eat from vineyards that you did not plant, and you grow fat, don't forget the Lord. Don't say, by my power I've done this. And that's what God knows. That's what you're going to have a tendency to do. And that's what they did. Yes, that's exactly right. All right, are we ready for the northern campaign? As Colby said, this one's impressive too. Now, if you're a Canaanite at this point, what are you thinking?
Let me go to another country.
Boy, that's what you would think they did. And surely some did. Surely some said, let's get out of here. But that's not what most of them did. And I say surely some did, maybe none of them did, I don't know. We know the Gibeonites had a different plan. We know Rahab had a different plan. But the majority of them didn't. And we're going to have a reference here that shows why most of them didn't, if not all of them didn't. Do you remember going all the way back to Genesis 15? God made a promise to Abraham that he was going to give them the land of Canaan, but not yet. Why? The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. I'm not ready to destroy them yet. By this point, God is ready to destroy them. So what's going to happen? Are they going to get away? No, they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be destroyed. And so when Steve says that, well, let's go to a different place. Obviously, they had free will in it because the Gibeonites, they decided, hey, we're going to try to ally ourselves with you. Rahab said, I'm going to help you. But the majority of them hardened their heart and said, all right, these guys are tough, no doubt about it. We got to find a way to beat them. What do y'all think? Well, if the 5 kings of the southern territory couldn't do it, maybe what we need to do is we need to get a bigger army. We need to attack even more. And so the kings of the earth rage. We'll defeat him. So here's what they do. Chapter 11, verse 1. It came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor. Now let's talk about Hazor just a little bit here. Let's zoom in on the northern territory. Hazor is right up here. Hazor was a big city. I would venture to say, based upon what I've read, that Hazor would be the New York City of the land of Canaan. It was over a 200-acre city, a walled city of over 200 acres. That's massive in ancient times. And so here you have bigger cities than we've at least talked about in the south. And so Jabin, king of Hazor, he sends to Jobab, king of Madon, and the king of Shimron, and the king of Akshaph, and the kings who were from the north of the mountains and the plain, and south of Chinneroth, and the lowlands, and the heights of Dor to the west, and the Canaanites in the east and the west, and the Amorite, and the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and the Hivite below Hermon, and the land of Mizpah. All right, so if we look at this, here are some of the places mentioned, but then we've also got the people living below Mount Hermon, living around the Sea of Chinneroth. What's the name for the Sea of Chinneroth? Yeah, you knew it by that. Did you know it's called the Sea of Chinneroth? All right, now you do. And so all the kings here, kings up in this region of the southern part of Lebanon. So all of this area, he sends to all of them, not just 5 kings. We need everybody. Come. And so they went out. And all of their armies with them, verse 4, as many people as what? As the sand of the sea that was on the seashore in multitude. And not only is there a bunch of them, what do they have? Horses and chariots. The biggest army that Israel's faced so far, and a lot more firepower than they've faced so far. Well, there you go. What is it?
Well, Egypt went after,
Yeah.
they had the largest army of chariots and everybody in the whole world at that time. And God washed them out crossing. So it don't matter, they're on dry land. I mean, they're up against God.
I think that's right.
And
And
he's going to take them all.
I think that's right. That's a good point.
Whether you think about the generation before the parents,
Mm-hmm.
they go spy out the land and say they can't make it.
Yeah.
Now they've got all of them coming against them.
Yeah, that's
They
right.
stand up, they stand up.
Yes, that's right. Excellent. So, All of these kings met together, and they came and camped at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. So they're united. You have to remember, a lot of these kingdoms fought against each other for decades, centuries. But now it's like, hey, we've got to band together. And so they all come together with a common purpose. And what's the common purpose? We're going to fight against God. I don't know if they'd word it that way, but that's what they would do, fight against God. And it's interesting how the world will band together to fight against God. Here's their attempt to do so. And so they come together at the waters of Merom, and they're going to fight against Israel. But the Lord said to Joshua, the Lord laughs. He says to Joshua, do not be afraid because of them. For tomorrow about this time I will deliver all the slain before Israel, and you shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. How long is this battle going to last? Not long. Tomorrow about this time, it'll be over. You'll have your victory. You'll have your spoil. And here's what I want you to do with the horses and the chariots. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right. So, verse 7. So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom. Is Joshua waiting for them to come and attack him? Nope. He says, all right, God, you gathered them together for us. We're ready. Let's go. And he goes, he attacks them. And I want a cinematic picture of this in slow motion of how the battle went, the great victory. But as the Bible so often does, what do I get?
Just a big picture.
And they won. They won. And so Joshua defeats them and came against them suddenly. The Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to Greater Sidon. So we do know where Greater Sidon is. So they're going to fight there. Joshua comes up, he attacks, and he's coming from the south. He defeats them, and they head to the north up to Greater Sidon. So he's chasing them up into Phoenician territory there and driving them out. Any thoughts or comments? How many did he destroy? All of them. None of them remain in the verse 8. Now, Joshua now has horses and chariots in his possession. Now, God defeated Egypt, and we talked about Egypt had a lot of horses and chariots. Did they beat any of those horses and chariots? No, because they all sank, right? But now Joshua has horses and chariots. This is how you know if an army is powerful or not, by how many horses and chariots they have. Now Joshua has horses and chariots. He's really somebody now.
Well, he's going to do what God told him to. He's going to hamstring the horses, which he took the ligaments in the back, and they ain't good enough.
Yeah, they're
And
not.
then you burn all the chariots. So, and God did it for a reason. If you don't have the chariots and you don't have the horses, you're not saying, look what we got. You're still looking to God for deliverance, where they had all that. And I think later on, God actually says to the people of Israel not to get
Yeah,
horses or chariots.
don't multiply those. Yeah,
Uh-uh.
that's right.
Too bad when you see it. But when you've got the nuclear bomb, like everything else,
Yeah, yeah,
it showed it was an active.
Yeah.
It showed that they trusted God was calling the cars of the horses and chariots. And it showed the nations around them. They had something greater than horses and chariots.
yeah. How demoralizing if you're one of the enemy, and you see this coalition with all as the sand of the seashore in multitude, with all of these horses and chariots, they're wiped out, and then what they capture, they burn it because it's like we don't. It's like, well, what do we have now that could possibly come against it? That's a great point. I like that. I think it's a good way of saying that, and it gets the point across. But you were talking about a great act of faith, and I think that's exactly right. And because what you have to do is you have to see things differently than the world sees them. Because the world saw horses and chariots as prized possessions that you want. And I'll tell you, things that I view as prized possessions are hard for me to burn. it's hard for me to do away with it. And so you look at it and you say, ugh, I just don't know if I can, I don't know if I can sacrifice that or not. Why can't we keep this? It's an act of faith, you say, because I don't need it. God is my defense. I don't need these things. These things are not valuable in that sense. So you have to think different from the world in order to do this. And Joshua is thinking different from the world. Right. That's right. Very good. Okay. We got 4 minutes. So I think we can cover this. So Joshua did as the Lord told him. Verse 10, Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all of those kingdoms. And they struck all of the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. Then he burned Hazor with fire. So I mentioned to you that Hazor was a major city there. They believe that Hazor was probably about 1,500 years old at this point. In other words, it wasn't a new city. It was an old city, well established, wall encircling 200 acres. If you go there today, you can go to the ruins where they have uncovered down to this layer that would have been the kingdom of Hazor at the time when Joshua came in. And it's really interesting what you'll see there. I've got this slide from when Jordan and I went. And do you notice this is the strata right here that they believe dates back to the time of Joshua? What do you notice about that? I know can you tell anything from that slide? You probably have to know where I'm going with this. Do you notice that? Well, yeah. Do you notice the coloration right in here? You see that gray in there that's not right here? You know what that gray is? It's ash. Yeah, it's ash. And the archaeologists are unanimously agreed on the fact that whatever happened during this period of time, Hazor was burned. And also, do you notice these rocks right here? Do you notice, can you see what's happened to those rocks? They're cracked. Do you know what causes them to crack like that? Yes, extreme heat. So when you dig down to this layer, what you find is the city was destroyed and burned. And that's exactly what the Bible says happened. Joshua burned the city. He burned this capital of the northern region there. And because I suspect it's because they kind of spearheaded the attack on the coalition that came against him. So all the cities of those kings, of their kings, Joshua took with a sword and struck with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them as what? As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. As for the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel burned none of them except Hazor only. And so all of the spoil of these cities, what were they able to do with that? If only Achan would have waited and obeyed. He could have had plenty of spoil, but he wouldn't. He didn't. And they destroyed and left none. Verse 15, as the Lord commanded Moses the servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. There's a theme here. We've seen this theme before. When you start seeing they did as the Lord commanded, how are things going to go for them? It goes well for them. It goes well for them. We see Israel at their best right now. They're trusting the Lord, and the Lord is working marvelously through them. His name is being glorified in the world as his people are obedient to it. Thoughts, comments in the last 30 seconds of the class?
Just goes to show you, if we did all that the Lord commanded, how much he would bless the church today.
I think that's the faith building lesson that we need to get. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your good attention.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.
Bye.